Thousands of holidaymakers are making their way through the Beitbridge border post into Zimbabwe. Many have travelled from other provinces in South Africa, hoping to get to the neighbouring country before Christmas. Border Control Management is monitoring the situation. Tshegohaco Moagi is at the border and joins us now. Tshegohaco, good to catch up with you again. A little bit earlier, you talked about motorists waiting as long as 10 hours in those queues. Have things improved?
Well, good afternoon, Hugo. Indeed. So it seems things are moving much quicker than what was anticipated earlier this morning. And even yesterday, where we are standing now, yesterday it was completely packed with much more people than what we are seeing behind me here. And so today things are moving much more quicker. And we have been told by the authorities here that, of course, it is the 24th, it is Christmas Eve, and there are fewer people somewhat than what we had yesterday and into the evening yesterday. But there are fewer people here today, even though, they are still also trying to make their way through to Zimbabwe, and systems are now moving much more smoother. I can also imagine that those that are working here would also like to take a slight break, although we do know that this Beitbridge border post does not close at all. It is an area that actually operates 24/7. And some of the people that have been here saying that the systems here move smoothly, but they don't know about what will happen when they arrive in Zimbabwe. But let's then bring in the Border Management Authority's Commissioner, Dr. Mike Musiapato. Thank you so much for your time, Commissioner. Let's just start off with, your visit here. What are you hoping to see and really just rectify from people moving into Zimbabwe?
No, thank you very much, Tseho, and for the opportunity. What we are basically here to do, fairly as the leadership of the Border Management Authority, is to come and have a look in terms of how the implementation of the plan is actually going in the port. We have been at Lubombo yesterday, and we came overnight to here in Beitbridge. So the main issue that we are looking for is to make sure that we are able to facilitate the movement of persons, but also the movement of cargo or trade in terms of trucks, together with the passenger vehicles, the buses and all of that as smoothly as possible. So up to this point we are fairly satisfied in terms of how the activities are taking place inside the port. But the most important issue had been to ensure that we facilitate the movement in terms of the corridor. That has always been the problem in many of the instances where you will find that we actually focused more on the activities in the port and find that in terms of the corridor there'd always been a blockage and all of that. So this time around we made sure that we put all of the colleagues on the ground in terms of the corridor management, and up to this point we are fairly satisfied that everything is actually going according to the plan.
Now we do know, of course, that there are these people that are coming in and going out of South Africa legally through this very border post. But, Commissioner, just a few meters away, just on the other side of the fence here, we are seeing people walking on the railway in and out of Zimbabwe. Surely there are soldiers somewhere to stop that kind of movement. What's the plan there? What's happening? Do you know how that movement can actually be stopped from the illegal immigrants that make their way in and out of the country?
Yeah, so you'll remember that in as much as we are dealing with the activities inside the port, there are some individuals who will always want to take chances and exit the country via the borderline. So we are fairly expecting those kind of individuals. But however, we have deployed members of the SANDF along the borderline close to the port of entry itself, and they are working together with members of the Border Management Authority in terms of the border guards, and they are out there making sure that they intercept those individuals. So however, we do know that at the end of the day there will be some that we might be missing along the value chain, and that issue is primarily based on capacity. Typical example, when we launched the first contingent of the border guards, we launched around 200 of the border guards. And out of the 200 here in Lubombo, we have 40 of them deployed. But them being deployed here, if you put them in terms of the shift system, we have around 9 or 10 deployed at a shift. So if you then have to juxtapose that number vis-a-vis the actual numbers of people who sometimes take chances, primarily because they don't have the paperwork that is required in terms of passport and the like, we sometimes become a bit overwhelmed. But for now, everything is under control. The colleagues are out there making sure that those that are trying their luck on the borderline are effectively intercepted, brought into the port, and then they get administrated and their fingerprints taken, and we are able to then process them to Zimbabwe as part of the deportation process.
There are some people that actually come in here that we spoke to yesterday that mentioned that they are coming in just to Musina to grab some necessities, some food and basics that they need because there aren't that many shops in Zimbabwe. Are all those people documented when they come into South Africa just to get some necessities, and how do you then handle that process?
Yeah, at the current moment, those that are coming through the port itself, they are documented because they do have passports, and indeed we allow them to come through into the country. They go into Musina and then they buy their groceries, and they are then able to exit the country as usual. However, there are those which unfortunately do not have the paperwork, primarily because the country on the other side struggles to give them all of those documentation. So it is those ones who sometimes also use the borderline to try and come through to buy those necessities. It is for that reason that our plan going into the future as the Border Management Authority, we are to have what we call informal community crossing points. Around Musina here, we are looking at the place to the east called Chirundu. To the west, we are looking at a place called Maroi. In those areas, we are going to create community crossing points where individuals will be able to cross into South Africa, buy things, and go back into the country. Because our biggest target is not necessarily people who are innocent civilians whose intention is to come and buy things, but our target is those people that are doing nefarious and illegal activities. And on that basis, when we then create those informal community crossing points, we will be able to proactively deal with the issues of criminality in terms of the longer term.
It seems things are moving much smoother here. I mean, the line here does seem quite dense, but it seems there is a bit of a better movement compared to yesterday. Do you know what systems were changed or what actually happened for us to see this turnaround in 24 hours?
Yeah, so what we basically did, one of the biggest challenges sometimes that we used to have was systems where you'll find that one monitor or one system dies. So this time around, what we have done is that we have spoken to our service providers in terms of IT support. So they deployed IT experts on the ground here at the port, even including in the other ports like in Lubombo as well as in Beitbridge. Those individuals are on the ground. Once we have any system glitch, they are able to intervene and get those systems actually addressed on the spot. So that on its own actually enabled us to be at full capacity in terms of ICT systems. So that is why you can see that we are able to facilitate as many people as possible, and to that extent we don't have any system that is down as we speak. So in instances, for example, of power failure, when our generator had to kick in, we sometimes had challenges where the systems will reboot slowly and all of that. So having the IT experts on the ground enables us to get those systems back online as quick as possible, and that is why you will see that we don't have people standing on queue for the longest time. We are able to process them through, and that is why they are able to move over into the other side.
Just then, your final words for those that work here at the border post specifically, but also to the many holiday makers who will be making their way, for many, it's actually home into Zimbabwe.
Yeah, firstly, I will say for those who are intending to come through to the port, just to say that we are fairly ready this side to be able to manage them. We are also fairly ready to be able to manage them on the corridor. The only issue that we are requesting is for the people to have some patience, especially on the corridor. Because when people try to jump the queue, that is where then the blockages actually happens, and we then have a problem. But when people follow the queue and they don't jump the queue, then we are able to facilitate them as it were. But in terms of our colleagues working in here, we just want to say that let's continue to do the great work. Let's continue to cooperate and work as a team and make sure that we do our part as provided for, so that we don't end up with situations where we will want to blame each other or anything of that nature. We work together under the leadership of the Port Management Committee, and up to this point, everything is working according to plan.
All right, thank you so much. From the Border Management Authority, that is Commissioner Dr. Mike Masia Patu, and he's just giving us details about the processes here at the Beitbridge border post, and saying that things are moving smoothly, and with those illegal migrants, so to speak, that are on the border line, that they will be also dealing with those to ensure that they do not make their way in and out of Zimbabwe freely without following all the right processes. Hugo?
Tshegohaco Moagi coming to us from Beitbridge border post, where thousands are crossing over into Zimbabwe.